Hello. Can you hear me? How would I know? Can you write in that you can hear me? Hi, Shira, you're here? Hi, Shira, are you here? Can we hear each other?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, I don't hear you.
Don't hear me.
But you could hear me? Thanks, Josh. Okay, Shira will be with us in just a second.
Can you hear me now?
No. Meanwhile, Shira just taught a session about a minute ago. I'm sure that she was heard. Josh, could you help us out with that? Okay. You can hear Shira? So how come I can't hear Shira? So maybe my volume.
Shoshana, can you turn up your volume?
Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, everybody. Hi, welcome. This is really exciting to be here, a collection of women from all over. It would be interesting, I think, to type in maybe where you're sitting. I'm in Mitzpe Netofa, Israel. If you never heard of it, please come to visit. We are in the Galil, Sachton. And I'd love to see you here. Shira, you're sitting in?
I'm in Fairlawn, New Jersey.
Fantastic.
You can also come visit here if you'd like. It's a very lovely place.
And then we can continue our conversation about how to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk Taharat HaMishpacha edition live. Please take on my invitation. I think it's very interesting to see where, for example, Devorah, Fran, Tova, Juliet, Ashira, and all the other people here would have to scroll to see where you're sitting. It's very exciting to be here together to learn about this very important topic. I'm going to share my screen and we'll jump right in. Here we go. This is a lifelong process, this enterprise of teaching our children about Taharat HaMishpacha. It very much mirrors the topic that hopefully you've learned already about a bunch of teaching children about healthy awareness of their bodies and selves and sexuality and physicality and relationships with, of course, the halachic and hashkafic twist. It's so important to us about the laws of Taharat HaMishpacha and the whole cycle of becoming Nida, becoming Tahora, how that all works, what the rules are at those times. There are some basic principles we want to be very clear about from the very beginning, which is it's never too early and it's never too late. So starting with the second half, it's never too late. If you're listening to this and after we give a lot of different examples of conversations that you might have with your children or moments that you might speak about the laws of Taharat HaMishpacha, and you're thinking, oh, I've never done any of that. Oh gosh, it's never too late. If you've never done it before, now is a great time to start. It's just like anything else that you realize one day, oh, I really should educate my children about that topic. It is never, ever too late. Just like you would realize one day, wow, I should talk to them more about finances. It's a really important topic. I didn't know anything about it till I was an adult. And the way to learn everything is from when you're younger. So too in this topic. And of course, it's never too early. Some people might think when my child goes to elementary school or has words or whatever you might think as some sort of benchmark for when to speak about it. It's a lifelong process. It's never too early. It's never too late. And the second piece is really important also. What is it going to look like when I do this right? How will I know that I think I'm on a good track? And that reminds us, Shira and me, of this fantastic image of what success really looks like. It's just seems all the time, especially when we look at other people, that success looks like a straight arrow that you go from here to there because you know where you're going and you get there and it's elegant and beautiful and fantastic. And what it really looks like is a lot of bumps along the way and a lot of things that maybe you wish you would have said a little differently. And a lot of, you remember that conversation that we had a few weeks back? I want to say this part that I didn't really make it so clear, I want to make it really clear. That's what it really looks like. And we know this from so many different areas of our life. I gave the example of finances before. We all know that if we made a mistake with our finances when we were 17, that's fine. That's normal. It's part of growing up. And that's just what it's going to be like. And we learn from it. Of course, we know that actually those mistakes help us be that much stronger. And we're going to move now into some of the elements of this topic in particular, the most important foundations that we established together, Shira and I. And the first one is modeling. And it cannot be stressed enough that everything about Torah education, mitzvah education, halacha education, and really almost everything about parenting in general begins and ends with modeling. That's everything. And amazingly, the sugyot of Taharat HaMishpacha address this in a sugya that we refer to as a srach bita, and I'll bring up the sources over here. The Gemara in Tzachim talks about when different women immerse in terms of daytime or nighttime. I'm going to start here. Kol chayvei tvilot tvilatan bayom. Everybody that has to immerse, because they entered some sort of status that they want to get out of by going into the mikvah, they have to do that during the daytime. Nida v'yoledet tvilatan balayla. There are two people who have a status that they need to get out of Nida and Yoledet, a woman who had a baby or a miscarriage after a certain time, that they are mandated to go to the mikvah only at the nighttime. How do we know they have to go to the mikvah at the nighttime? Detanya yachote tovelet miba'od yom. Could it be that Nida would go to the mikvah even during the day? Talmud lomar, and then the Gemara quotes a pasuk, Shivat yamim teheh b'nidata. The Torah speaks about a woman being nida for 7 days, the menstruation. Some people are familiar with the different status of nida and zeba. When the Torah addresses the woman that's a nida, then it's a 7-day status, and it's for 7 days. Benidata kol shiva. Then she stays in the status of nida for all of the 7 days, a complete 7 days. Therefore, she can only go to the mikvah at night when the 7th day is over. Of course, a Jewish day starts at night and then ends in the evening, and then at nighttime she can immerse. V'yoledet itkish lenida. And a woman who's a yoledet, who has that birth experience, she's connected in the way that the Chazal teach us about different type of mitzvot, connected to Nida, because the Torah itself says a Yoledet is like a Nida. And so she also only can immerse at the end of her time period, and so that's at nighttime. Then the Gemara in Nida talks about this also, and it specifically addresses what about a woman who goes to the mikvah for some reason a little bit later than she was meant to. If her first opportunity to use the mikvah was, let's say right now, Sunday night. I'm in Israel, so it's Sunday night. And then for some reason she can't go. There's just something totally in her way. And she and her husband discuss it, and she chooses to go to the mikvah on Monday night. So on Monday. So Amar Rav, Nida bizmana, Eina tovelat ela belayla. V'shelo bizmana. Now he has to address the issue of, if you miss Sunday night, can you go your next opportunity? Can you go Monday morning at the crack of dawn, Monday morning at 10 a.m., Monday afternoon at 3 p.m.? When can you go? Or do you have to wait until Monday evening, which I think probably some people on the line might not be aware of the sugya, but they know that the bottom line would be that Monday night is going to be her first option. So again, Amar Rav, Nida bizmana eina tovelet ela balayla, v'shelo bizmana tovelet bayom. Ben bayom u ben balayla. She can choose. She can go as soon as she can, which would either be Monday during the morning or Monday in the nighttime. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, ben shelo bizmana eina tovelet ela balayla. Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is no. She doesn't matter if she's on time or not on time. When she misses the Sunday night opportunity, she still has to wait till the nighttime, and she can only go on Monday night. Mishum, this comes to the connection of our discussion, srach bita, because of a concept called srach bita. Srach is very hard to define. Bita is her daughter. Because of her daughter being around, because of her daughter being exposed to her, because of what her daughter is going to soak in from watching her mother, meaning to say, even though mikvah we keep so private, certainly nowadays, but even I think when people's statuses were much clearer, the specific timing of when a woman would go to the mikvah because she's nida, parts of the process were kept private. And even so, the daughter would pick up on the nuances. She maybe did see that the woman would change clothing in the time when people had special clothes for nida. But certainly now when we're very private about it, the daughter was around the mother enough to kind of soak in messages from whatever she would see. So if she saw her mother go to the mikvah one time or sometimes on Monday afternoon, just to continue with our example, then she'll think that you can go to the mikveh in the afternoon sometimes. And if she saw a lot of other times, because they were times that the woman went on time, that her mom went to the mikveh at nighttime, then she'll think it's a choice or it's an option. You can go when it works for you. And that doesn't work, because when it's Sunday, she's not allowed to go Sunday during the day. That's too early. We saw the pasuk cited earlier from Vayikra, Shivat Yamim Tehei B'nidata. The Gemara said, Kol Shivat. She needs to wait the whole 7 days. And because of this concept of Srach Bita, the daughter is going to learn from the mother. Then the mother is not allowed to go to the mikveh on Monday morning. In our example, she must wait till Monday night. And the Gemara even says, Rav Hadar Bey, and even Rav changed his opinion, changed his mind. What we initially saw was basically a disagreement. Rav had one opinion, that if she's late, then she can go as soon as she can, which includes the daytime. And Rabbi Yochanan said, no, she has to wait till nighttime. But the Gemara actually records that Rav changed his mind. The Amar Rav Yichia bar Ashi, Amar Rav, Nida, ben bizmana, ben shelo bizmana, eina tovelet ela balayla, mishum srach bita. The Rav changed his mind and said, no, Anida, and he means also a yoledet. It doesn't matter if she's going to the mikveh on time or not on time. Whenever she's going to go, it's going to only be at nighttime, because the daughter is going to soak in everything she sees. I want to hand it over to Shira. Maybe I'll stop sharing for a minute. I can see her.
So in addition to this concept of Sarach Bita, and that we are modeling everything for our children, and that we need to recognize that we're modeling, and take ownership of that, and recognize the place that we have in our children's lives and what they see. Being self-aware is so important when it comes to every aspect of parenting, but particularly with Taharat HaMishpacha. There's a story, I believe it's of the Chazon Ish, that a couple, when they were expecting their first child, they were very young, and they went to him and they said, when do we start being mechanech our child? Like, when do we have to become more conscious of this and more aware of it, more intentional? And he looked at them and he said, that should have started 20 years ago. And what he meant by that was, your entire life, your entire experience of working on yourself is ultimately going to be given over to your children. And when parents have unresolved difficulties with any aspects of Taharat HaMishpacha, whether it's with sexuality, whether it's with the mitzvot themselves, whether it's with relationships, any aspects of intimacy, whether it's with the concept of marriage in general, any challenges that we have on our own will impact the way we give over this mitzvah to our children. And the flip side is true as well, that whatever positive experience we have will also transfer over to our children. And I'll let Shoshana take over that concept.
It's so true. And it takes a lot of working on oneself. Like Shira was talking about self-awareness, being in capital letters and a lot of exclamation points changes everything. Awareness. If we have a positive association and feelings toward certain mitzvos, or all the mitzvos, or avodas Hashem in general, but really that we imbue our actions and our preparations and everything we speak about that has to do with mitzvos, it's really an avoda. And it's okay to be human. We're meant to be human, but really to approach the mitzvos as a huge zchut, a tremendous merit that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a chance to serve him in this way, and to sort of try to not go into, I'm just going to give examples because maybe I've done them once or twice and I want to work on myself. Oh, it's so stressful. I'm allowed to say I'm stressed out, of course, but if I exude stress and negativity around Shabbos all the time, for example, Shabbos preparations, I think is a big common example that can come up, then I have a system that's not working in my household. You can even separate it for a second from Avodat Hashem. If that's what I do every Friday, and I have meltdowns and I yell at people, and it's a big mess, then I've got to work on it. But if I can try to say comments more like, I could use help, who can help mommy? Or, wow, I'm so excited that our cousins are coming for Shabbos. It's going to be a lot of work. Is anybody interested in baking with me? Things more on that side. Again, I want to permit the stress. It's allowed, but I think that our language and our nuance about those feelings, how they come out, it's very different, one from the other. And if we can work on our relationship with Taharat HaMishpacha in particular, and kind of as Yoat, so I think Shira and I and many others have a kind of, we're privy to a lot of women's and men's different experiences. And there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of things that really are hard for people about using the mikveh, about Taharat HaMishpacha, about separating physically from one another, about trips that are planned anyway and then work out badly with the calendar. So it's hard to be upset about the trip. So people sometimes are upset about the Nida experience. It's all very, very difficult. But if with that frame of mind that I want to try to be positive about this really is a blessing. How can I see it as such? Then maybe also our words can kind of follow from that and our behaviors, and teaching that by modeling that positivity between in the relationship and towards any actions around whatever preparations the children would know about. And I see there was a question from the audience, why can a mother just clarify that a woman doesn't usually go to the mikveh in the daytime? It's just a special exception. It's very, very difficult to do that in halacha in general. We have a concept of lo plug. We can't make distinctions. Very hard for a system to make fine distinctions about practices that people would see. I'm trying to think of another example. Maybe Shira could help me. But I know that I have discussions with my children about this sometimes. We just had meat. I don't want you to have dairy. Now, if I say, well, this is really something special that the ice cream truck came and all your siblings had dairy and you're the only one that had meat, so it's okay. It's very tricky. It's as an educational experience, it's very tricky. Obviously, everything depends on the child's situation, as we're going to talk about in just a moment, more concrete details about educating. But it's a very hard thing to try to distinguish for a child. I've had that experience. I could also say right before Shabbos, children, some people think are allowed to violate Shabbos when there's some need. It's actually not really true. For a parent to kind of tell a child to turn on or off the lights is very complicated. Some other thing that's more forbidden, for example. And right before Shabbos, sometimes there really is a time that's not yet Shabbos and the mother lit candles. And maybe perhaps you can explain, but really nuances are hard to explain.
It's a great question, though, and halacha does account for that, that this concept is a little bit removed from our initial concern about immersing during the day during the 7 clean days. So while as a general rule, women don't immerse during the day, the halachic system does account for the fact that there may be certain circumstances in which immersing during the daytime might be necessary. And so if this does come up as a practical question, it's always a good idea to reach out and ask an individual question.
Yeah, I'm really glad you added that, because the next line in the Gemara was about those practical cases. And I didn't think we would go into this conversation, but the next line gives cases of emergency situations that make it impossible for one to use the mikveh at night. For example, wild animals that will be present during the nighttime. So thank you very much for pointing that out.
Sure.
Yeah, and definitely halacha is very nuanced in many other cases. So it's a bit of it's a very good question.
Okay.
Moving us over to foundational concepts for conversation and principles of our conversations.
So when we approach any conversation with our children, it's important to start from very basic levels of information and then allowing for there to be an expansion of these concepts and giving more information over time as is age appropriate. And in education, we have this concept of scaffolding where we give a little bit of information, we allow it to sink in, we allow the children to apply that knowledge, and we give more increasingly complex ways for them to understand information and apply information. And that's something that is so important in this area as well, that we want to start with giving conceptual information and basic concepts, and then allow over the course of our raising them to continue the conversation in ways that are increasingly complex, increasingly nuanced, and giving more information as they are able to take in that information, as they're able to understand it, as they're able to contextualize it within the information that you've already given them. One of the ways that I think is so important to start doing this is with foundational halachic considerations and also hashkafic considerations for having times when we have things that are asr and then they're mutar, and the opposite way as well. And so, for example, having conversations with your children about how on Shabbos we can't do certain things But when it's not Shabbos anymore, we can. So when your very young child, when your toddler is coming over to you on Shabbos and asking you for a device or to listen to music or to color on Shabbos, different families will have different ways that they approach this. But starting the conversation of, no, it's Shabbos. We don't do that on Shabbos. We have so many other things we can do on Shabbos. But when Shabbos is over, you can do those things. It starts to introduce this concept of that in Judaism, in halacha, we have times when things are off limits and we have times when things are totally fine and we can do them. And one of the ways that I heard this in the context of sexuality and Taharat HaMishpacha is from a teacher of mine when I was in seminary, actually in Israel. And she told a story that it was Pesach one year, and she had a 3-year-old son. And it was at the end of Pesach. I think Pesach ended on a Thursday or something. So Pesach was fresh in his mind. The idea that chametz is off limits was fresh in his mind. But then the next day it was Shabbos, and she asked him to bring the challahs to the table, and he gasped and he was like, "Challahs? That's chametz. I can't do that. We can't have chametz in the house. We got rid of all the chametz. What are you talking about, mommy?" And she responded to him and said, "On Pesach, we didn't have chametz. That was Esther. We couldn't have it. We tried so hard to get rid of the chametz. But now that it's Shabbos, it's a mitzvah." And teaching our children that we can have this very drastic contrast and this almost jarring jump from no usser to this is a mitzvah and this is beautiful and this is something that we celebrate as part of our lives is another foundational concept that really lays the groundwork for having this conversation about Taharat HaMishpacha and about sexuality in general.
I can just imagine that family enjoying that boy's special reaction. What you said reminded me also, Rav Rohavtik, who trains the Yoatzot in the Israel program that Nishmat has for Yoatzot training, used to always ask he wanted to make sure it would sharpen everyone's mind. If I ask you if you're allowed to drive on Shabbos, don't say no off the bat. It's true, generally speaking, driving on Shabbos is forbidden. But if you're rushing to an emergency medical situation, then it's absolutely your prerogative to do so. And even you would say a mitzvah. And he was telling us as adults, keep that in mind, that nuance, that distinction, that each case is really needs to be evaluated. And it could be one or the other. I also love your examples, how we went from something that was forbidden to something being permitted, which in sexuality, as we'll see also very shortly, is so important, right? Because if you told me about somebody saying to a child, "Can you please bring me that cup of water 5 minutes before Yom Kippur?" And then 10 minutes later, the child trying to help mommy by bringing a cup of water and the mother saying, "No, it's usher." So that's very important, but it's nice also to see the flip side when things become permitted. It's very exciting. The next point on our list of principles for these conversations is to take all the invitations you get. Just grab them. What do I mean when I say grab your invitations? I mean, if there's an opportunity to teach your child about Taharat HaMishpacha in particular, a field that so many people feel they're only exposed to when they're approaching marriage, or maybe if they're lucky in some sort of high school education class, that's still very, very late. If you think about the ages Shira was speaking about and never too early. It's so late. It's so late for someone to open up to you. I personally felt that as a woman who was very involved in Judaic studies, who loved to take all the classes available. When I had electives in high school, I took all the Judaic studies electives. That was what was interesting to me, even already in elementary school. And I felt when I got married that I was scandalized that there was all this information I did not have access to before, that nobody had exposed me at all. There was no scaffolding. I'm exaggerating a little bit because my mother, as an example, Shati Bria, as they say in Israel, did take a lot of invitations. My mother, for example, took me to the Kela mikveh. That is a beautiful invitation when we have a new item that needs to be kind of welcomed into our kitchen by being brought to the mikveh before use. So let a child see that and then talk about what this is. These are special waters. Happens to me, mikveh, a lot of Kela mikveh don't look so nice. But you can say that there's this part of the mikveh, and there's also this other part of the mikveh, if you're in, obviously, such a building, only the truth, of course, in let's say, a mikveh that has both. There's another area of this mikveh, they're all connected to these very special waters that have very special halachot about being natural waters, that these tap waters are kind of connected to, and in that way get the special halachic status of those mikvah waters. And here, when we place this dish inside the mikvah, we change it from not being suitable for our use to now being suitable for our use, and then we can use it. And there's another place that people go to the mikvah. Now, at a certain age, I might not even say that yet. Just like Shira said, there's sometimes just too much information for one person. If I'm talking to someone who's 3 or 4 or 5, maybe even 6, I might not say that. But 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds can totally understand that there's 2 parts of this building and that this pool is very small and it's only for a person dipping a dish or cutlery in. And there's another area that's more similar in size a little bit to a small pool, and that's where a person would go. And it doesn't have to be connected to sexuality and physicality and sex. It's just a thing that they should know. And then they'll hear one time people talking before Yom Kippur about immersion, or men talking about tevilah, going into a mikvah, and it will not be a foreign language because they've been exposed to this concept of mikvah, of purifying waters, of a special thing that Hashem gave us, a mitzvah that's immersive. And later it can, and I think should be, also connected with sexuality. I was talking with a Yoatza that lives in Israel, and she pointed out that in maybe in Chutz La'aretz, a lot of the examples like that would be a kelim mikvah, but not only in Israel, for example, there are tons of especially tourist attractions, but if anybody going hiking and such might see ancient mikvaot, they're all over. And it was a much bigger part even of halachic Judaism than what we experience today. And so there's another invitation to grab, to say, these mikvah waters have special powers. They change a woman's status, for example, after she menstruates. You might say to someone who's 10, 12, 15, they know those words. Then it's completely a wonderful thing for a parent to throw that out there, uninvited by the child, because shortly we'll talk about when the child asks questions, but I can grab an invitation that's around me, just like I might say, just offer information about a flower that I see, or like I said before about finances, something that gives me an excuse to talk about this, I can grab it. I might also say to a child, oh, I read that book when I was in 8th grade with my class. I remember there being some kissing and touching. That was a little weird for me because I also knew at the time that boys and girls aren't supposed to touch like that until they're married. Did you notice that? And it could open a conversation there where maybe the child didn't realize, but I read that book and I could speak with him about that kind of thing. The opportunities are everywhere. It's the kind of thing, once we open our eyes to that, and maybe you've been already doing this and just kind of opening even wider, that we have the right, and not necessarily to overload every single second of every single day, but to take these opportunities and throw out. We actually can take the invitations and throw out invitations. We could see if it interests our child and speak about it more.
Yeah, that's so great. I started taking my children to the Kela mikveh when they were around 3 years old, and started having conversations similar to what you're saying about other people also sometimes go to the mikveh, and there's a people mikveh and there's a Kela mikveh, and talking about the differences. And again, nothing connected to sexuality, but they really get the concept of mikveh. And now they've grown up, and they're still young, but over the years we keep coming back to that conversation, and every year or so I'll add in another detail about who can go to the mikveh or why they might go to the mikveh, and so that I find it very helpful once you've already had that foundation to add in that information as the years go on. And it allows it to be a continuous conversation as opposed to a one-time thing that you're trying to convey everything about this concept in one shot. It really allows it to be more experiential and last over the course of many years, which is healthy and helpful for everyone. Something else that can start at a very young age and continue the conversation over many years is teaching about values. Take these invitations, these opportunities, whenever they arise, to talk to your children about things that you notice, that you like, that you dislike, that you agree with, that you disagree with, because it allows for a framework for having conversations about values, about what your family values are, what you want your children to get out of these experiences. And one of the ways that we can do that is when children are noticing that their friends are allowed to do things that they're not doing, and that's really hard for them. Talking to them about different families do different things, and that might be really hard for you. And talking to them about struggle, right? That internal struggle. We want to do what's right, and we are committed to doing what's right. And sometimes that's really hard. And that's a very foundational concept, not only for halacha, but just, you know, ethics and morals in general. We teach values that we do the right thing, or we do the thing that we believe is the right thing, even if we find that to be really hard. And we also try to find ways to build up our children's appreciation for doing the right thing, and we celebrate their commitment to that. So for example, if your child is doing something, or they're holding back from doing something. I once saw an interaction with one of my children when she was on a play date. A friend said something, and my daughter turned to her and said, that really wasn't such a nice thing to say about another child. And afterwards, I pulled her aside and said, I'm so proud of you that even though it must have been a little uncomfortable for you to confront your friend about this, that you stood up for the right thing. And I'm so proud of you for doing that. And having these conversations, we might not directly connect them to the concepts of Taharat HaMishpacha about sexuality, um, when we're having these conversations, but teaching our children about values and doing what is the right thing, or what we believe to be the right thing, even if it's hard and even if it's uncomfortable, is one of the most important messages. Because as they grow up, and as sexuality and Taharat HaMishpacha, it becomes more complicated as they get older, and imbuing in them these values at such a young age, they're lessons that will carry over with them throughout all of the rest of these conversations and through their later experiences, which do start to bring in the sexuality layer, and that piece, and it can be helpful guidance for them throughout, all of those conversations.
Totally. A very kind of closely related top value that we have is we're going to do that even if nobody could see, which in Taharat HaMishpacha and sexuality becomes everything. Nobody
Right.
can see, and here we are, 44 people. We all know about these mitzvot, and nobody could see. Nobody will ever see. This is private, 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 and it's the truest testament to service of God, Yirat Shamayim. And when a child knows that nobody was really necessarily watching, we weren't at the play date, but it's pretty likely that Shira's daughter didn't know that Shira was catching this little snidbit, and she did what she did because she thought it was right. That's really like the double duo of goodness, doing what's right and just doing it because it's right, even though there's not going to be necessarily that praise, that mommy hug, or accolades from other people around. It's so huge, and critically important. We will move in a moment to some kind of more content related topics, but we also wanted to say that these halachic and hashkafic things, they could be at every single level. Like the concept that Shira was just talking about, planting the seeds for doing the right thing at every age. The youngest of children can learn that, building up their conscience in terms of personhood, if you can separate that from mitzvahhood and service of God, and all the way up through adulthood, as your relationship with your child becomes an adult child parent relationship, and halacha and hashkafa will be inside all those conversations, that exactly like what you were saying about how there's another sentence every time they go to the Kela mikveh. And now I want to move to a topic of the content. What are we actually teaching? Since we have those guiding principles, the first one we put here is love. We could absolutely not separate the conversation about Taharat HaMishpacha from general relationships and love, because while some people might think of Taharat HaMishpacha about actions and lack of action, it is completely about the relationship between the man and the woman, and the do's and the don'ts kind of take us around a cycle of how to interact with each other. But the relationship is the beginning and the end of all the halachic information that we learn. I want to share a midrash that I just think is so eloquent about a woman and a man who were married for a very, very long time, and 10 years, and they didn't have any children. And there's other sessions about that incredibly sensitive topic. The midrash continues to another direction in terms of what they do. They say to each other, the strict there are halachot that is generally not common practice today, but on the books, a couple would divorce at such a time so that they can try to build a family, maybe with a different spouse, and they go to one of the Tanaim for guidance, and they're told, okay, listen, you divorce in the same way that you married. And he's like, what? Never heard that advice before. He said, yeah, you make a gathering for your friends and family, just like you did when you got married. This is kind of has a different tone to it, but you'll make a dinner party, the same kind of event. In terms of like, if you just took a snapshot, it would look similar to your wedding. They thought that was pretty strange advice, but they listened, and they're at this gathering, and the wife makes sure that the husband kind of drinks a little too much. And as the husband is kind of delighting in the music and the atmosphere and the wine, he says to his wife, knowing that this is their divorce party, take your favorite thing from my household, bring it to your father's home, as was the custom for many generations, that a woman would live in her parents' home if she was not married. And then he kind of drifts off to sleep. And the woman tells all her friends and all the servants to come take the chair he's sitting on and bring it with her to her parents' house. And he wakes up, he's like, what's going on? Why am I in your parents' house? It's the last place in the world he imagined waking up from his divorce party was in his ex-in-law's house. And she says, you said, take the thing I want the most, and that's you. And I love this midrash for so many reasons. It's unbelievable to keep the main thing, the main thing. And it's unbelievable how hard it is to keep the main thing, the main thing. I'm quoting Stephen Covey, one of my most beloved heroes, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it might be something that you start to read and you're wondering why Shoshana would like it so much. But over many years, I finally went from the beginning to the end of the book. And then I read every type of book he wrote, because he wrote one for teens, and then he wrote one for families, and he wrote one for students. I read them all because I think they're amazing. One of his quotes is, the main thing is to keep the main thing, the main thing. And I feel very much that when the woman says to her husband, En li chafetz tov ba'olam yoter mimcha, there's nothing more in the world to me than you, it's one of the most moving pieces of Chazal. And I see it in terms of the spousal relationship, but really about everything, that you want to keep the main thing, the main thing. Whatever the topic is, if it's safety, then safety, the main thing. And those values of love and the relationship are, of course, going to be far and away taught mostly by the role modeling. There will also be explicit conversations, and I welcome you and challenge you to have explicit conversations about love and relationships, and to begin at age-appropriate levels to speak about romantic love versus other kinds of love, and to try to give over as much as you can find the language for those kinds of interactions and relationships and how we invest in them. I started to make a point of telling my children, I'm going to save this aside for Abba, if let's say he's not able to come on time for dinner or something like that. I want them to know that in a spousal relationship, when someone loves someone else, so there's a lot of things that we do that are actions to show our love. Now, you can't summarize my relationship by saying I set aside some food for my husband, but it is an important piece of a family dynamic and a love relationship that I do think it's fair to talk about. Again, we talk about so many things, so let's not forget to talk about the main things. And that's what I want to invite you to do. Speaking about love and Taharat HaMishpacha. And of course, just to say very explicitly, in Taharat HaMishpacha, in the cycle of becoming Nida and getting out of Nida, there's that time when a couple is permitted to each other physically. That's part of this picture. That's part of Taharat HaMishpacha. It's not just the no's at all. It has to also be the yeses, and the expression of the love in all the different ways is a piece of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea that we talk about sometimes directly and sometimes indirectly, that notion of that emotional intimacy, what connection we share with our partners, that's also so integral to this conversation. And being able to guide children through these concepts of, we have different relationships with different people, and also our physical relationship with them grows out of that level of intimacy with that person. So for example, We can hug and kiss people in our immediate family. We don't hug and kiss people that we don't know who are on the street. And there's everything in between there, that we have this idea of emotional intimacy that aligns with physical intimacy. And ideally, the way that we interact with these people is parallel to that experience. And introducing that and talking to them about it, not just in terms of allowed behavior, not allowed behavior, but in terms of, yes, it's great to give your friend a hug when you haven't seen them or when you're excited to see them. And um, that's a great expression of affection, because that's an appropriate way to express your affection for them. And look at how beautiful that relationship is with them. And noting that there are different types of physical relationships for different types of people. Um, Also, talking about physical relationships, we can teach our children concepts of consent, and the way that that might happen when a child is very young. So, for example, my 3-year-old son just a few months ago decided, I don't like kisses. I don't like any form of kisses. I don't want them. And if anyone tries to give him a kiss without asking for them, he will get very upset. And so, teaching him, we ask you before we give you a kiss. That's your right. It is your body, and you're allowed to decide that. And you also ask other people before touching them. That's teaching them consent from the time that they're toddlers. It's so important, and to teach them that they respect their own bodies and they respect other people's bodies, and they have a right to decide how they interact with other people. I know that sometimes this comes up with extended family, that sometimes people will feel that they have to make their children give certain family members hugs when they haven't seen them in a long time. And some children, that will come very naturally to them. Some children will just, out of an expression of their relationship with these people, they will run and give them a hug and a kiss, and they'll be so happy to have that. Some children don't like that as much. And teaching them that they don't have to hug or kiss family members by virtue of the fact that they're family members is so important and foundational to their understanding that they can have autonomy over their own bodies and that they can make those decisions. And teaching them that when you want to engage in physical affection with other people, sure, go ahead, assuming it's an appropriate relationship for that. And when you don't, that's also okay, is another one of these foundational messages. And to flip it towards another aspect of this is teaching them that when you enjoy something, great, and you should be aware of that, and you should savor that, and you can teach them about pleasure through all of their senses. And so if somebody is eating something that's really delicious, you can both model for them, like we talked about in the beginning, that modeling, like, this ice cream is so yummy, I love this flavor, it's so good. Or this apple is so delicious, look how lucky we are that Hashem gave us these delicious fruits and vegetables and foods and all sorts of things that we can eat. We're so lucky. It's amazing. And also encouraging them to think about what they like and don't like. What are your favorite flavors of ice cream? That's really yummy, isn't it? Don't you enjoy that? And taking it also to other types of sensations. So if if you're noticing your child really likes a soft blanket, you can say, oh, that feels really good to you, doesn't it? Or sometimes children will take like very long showers, or maybe that's just in my family, but it's probably shared amongst other people also. But teaching them that, yeah, that warm water feels really good, and it's teaching them to notice that sensation on their body and be able to enjoy it, to recognize it, to enjoy it, and to be able to articulate what they enjoy, just on a from looking at all of their senses, with smells also. What types of flowers do you like? What's your favorite color? These are all opportunities to teach children that they can enjoy pleasurable things, and physical pleasure is something that we think is wonderful. And it's in contrast to some other religious perspectives that are, we try to live an aesthetic experience, and we just engage in the physical world because we We have
We're
to,
trapped.
what did you say?
Because we're trapped in our bodies.
We're
Yes.
trapped in our bodies
Mhm.
and we just engage with the world because we have to. That's not what we think. We think that the physicality of this world can be beautiful and it should be enjoyed. And it was such a gift that Hashem gave to us. And being able to teach our children that this is, pleasure is something that we really value, um, is also so important to have that conversation.
Totally. Um, I'm just laughing at all the different examples that came up recently that she was allowing this education, and to my adult ears, it almost sounds like indulgence, and it's true. I was unfortunately trained to whack out all physical needs and pleasure and just kind of plow through and keep studying and get through college and et cetera, et cetera. I think sometimes we think of it as a skill to kind of turn off our bodies
Mhm.
and just use our minds. And of course, that's not possible, nor is it desirable, though it is sometimes useful or has its has its pluses, but it always needs to be done in balance and with an understanding that we're not accidentally in our bodies. God put us in our bodies 1,000% on purpose, and to use them and to enjoy the blessings of this world. So it's so true. And I want to speak about the physical and sexual development that happens with growing up. And just want to remind you of our outline here. The child that we're speaking of is either 3 months old or 6 years old or 12 years old or 18 years old, and then at totally different places in his anatomical or sexual development. Sometimes talking about some of these things actually before they happen is a little bit more comfortable. I know that with some of my children, I kind of talked about deodorant and underarm hair before they come up, because by the time they would come up, I have a feeling that my children would maybe be less interested in speaking with mommy about these topics. Maybe not. That will come to the last thing. I hope that the lines of communication are always going to be open, but it is very likely that there will be times that they don't really want to hear from me. So some of the things I would say, as much as we said to speak age appropriately all the time, it is still age appropriate, but sometimes we kind of jump the gun a little in a positive sense to preempt a time when maybe the questions won't be coming and we can give the information now so easily. What do I mean? To be more concrete. So I won't tell my 6-year-old about deodorant unless he sees me buying deodorant, applying deodorant, and I'll say, this is to help adults smell or not smell. Maybe I'd say smell nice or not smell not nice, because adults have different bodies than children, and once then they get hot and sweaty, then they sometimes don't smell nice. So this is what we buy that for. But with a 11-year-old, I might say, I bought an extra thing of deodorant because one of these days or years you'll feel like maybe it would be a good idea for you. So you can take it or leave it here in the bathroom. And whenever you're kind of interested, you could take it. This happened in my house recently. And literally the next day, I saw that my child had like deodorant marks on his shirt. Those classic deodorant marks of the mistake of putting deodorant on before you finish getting dressed and thinking like that'll be good. That goes under the shirt. So you put it on before the shirt, but then it gets marks. I'm sure many of you have had this experience. So without him having any idea that I saw, we were having a different conversation, and somehow I brought up the order of operations that, a lot of people takes them a few times to learn. I forgot how I said it, but he didn't feel self-conscious. He didn't check his shirt. I forget how it was. Not all my remarks are so elegant, but in this case, it kind of came out right. To throw out the information that I had forgotten to say when I gave him the deodorant. And when you do start to apply, you should know. Anyway, some of the things that we're going to want to do, we're going to do a little bit in advance. But let's return to the baby. Already a 3-month-old is petted, caressed, massaged, diapered with a lot of love and touch in all the ways that Shira was talking about experiencing our body. Newborns don't have that problem. That's all they do. And then we, as I was joking, whack out of people their physical awareness of themselves in the body, and we're going to try not to anymore. We're going to try to be a population that speaks with our children about those things along the way, even if they kind of focus less on their bodily needs in a very positive way. We're kind of going to help them retain their enjoyment of pleasure, noticing pleasure, indulging in pleasure, and seeing that as a positive thing in the right context. The child who's 1 or 2, who's has body parts, we're going to want to teach him all the names of those body parts. This kind of, like I said from the beginning, goes hand in hand with general teaching about sexuality and physicality. And we're going to mix together all the messages about halacha and hashkafa and body parts all at once. So, for example, when she was talking about touch and pleasure, so if we see a child who's touching his genitals at 2 or 3 or 4 in the bath, it's completely wonderful and normal and natural for a child to do that. And we certainly don't want to be in a situation of telling a child not to do that in those contexts, or to make a face or a fech or anything like that. And we may even want to say, oh, it feels nice. It's great. Or Hashem gave us some these body parts and they could feel so good when we touch them or when we share them. We have to figure out the exact wording for the child at the stage. I would say some of those things when we touch them, when we share them, only when we feel comfortable. Now, I don't expect my 3-year-old to go anywhere and share his genitals, but I already feel like I could say, in the similar sense of the deodorant case, a little bit in advance, I don't want to say it's only for you, always only for you. I personally don't feel so comfortable with that, because even though that's true for the next very many years of this child's life, if it's not always going to be true, then I'd rather not say the sentence. You can add in share anything that you feel like you want to. These conversations are done with discretion and in private moments, but without still giving any kind of shame connotations to, just because I wouldn't talk about this deodorant case in the park doesn't mean that there's anything shameful about the fact that it's a part of growing up. And likewise with the body parts, having the body parts, saying the body parts names, explaining to the child what this is called. And again, at an age appropriate level, my 3-year-old girl should know that she has vulva. That's the name of the external genitalia that a female has. She doesn't need to know about the uterus and the ovaries. She has no idea how the inside of the body works. It's a hard thing to fathom at many ages. But a 9-year-old or even a 7-year-old maybe understands that we have organs inside our body. And we, just like we would talk about the stomach. So too, I think that we should also talk about the uterus or the ovaries, any internal part of the body that we feel that the child can process, then we can share and teach about it. The same thing is true for the halachic messages that go along with all these different pieces. So for example, I said about sharing before, but also let's say in the case of males, sometimes, oh, did you see sometimes the penis goes up and is hard like that? I might say to my 5-year-old son once in a while after he urinates, when that happens, when he has an erection. Now, there's nothing sexual about that moment, but it is a bodily phenomenon that he is either aware of or not really aware of, and he either has given it thought or not. I wouldn't really know unless he asks me about it, and that's wonderful if he does, and then we'll go there, right? But if he doesn't, I can still throw that out there, and then he'll know that I know. This happened today. My 10-year-old didn't go to school, and he was looking over my shoulder at the slides, and I said, you know what, do I talk with you about these things? I decided, instead of pretending like, oh, this is private, he shouldn't see this. Obviously, that would totally go against the message of the talk. You knew I wouldn't do that. We were on this page or whatever, a different slide, I don't remember. And I said, do you feel I talk with you about this and this and this? And then we started to talk about it a little bit. And I gave an example that I had a toddler in the room, and sometimes his penis gets hard. And then I said something that happens with teenagers, especially. And then it becomes kind of a lot of times connected to certain feelings that they have inside, related to romantic feelings or something that interests them sexually inside. I don't know. Do you know exactly what I mean? Like, I knew that he might not know, but I thought it was appropriate, a little bit ahead of the game. I know him. It seemed to me appropriate timing to throw that out there. He is not into romantic love. There's a tiny bit of a crush conversation recently in his grade, but that's very far away from. We're kind of sheltered here, I should say, in terms of media and stuff. Maybe this is, maybe in other places people would have different things that their fifth graders are, what they see. Anyway, then he said, oh yeah, I know. Sometimes when I'm on the swing, that happens. I said, oh, I don't have a penis, so I don't know about those experiences. That's so interesting. It's something about swinging and the air and maybe the free fall experience and physically causes an erection. It was just so interesting and open and comfortable for him to share about his body. And that's exactly the kind of dynamic I want to have with him. I just want to add, in terms of kind of very concretely, I also told him about how when a boy is, especially a teenage boy, sometimes along with the erection, there's actually fluid that comes out of the penis. And that even happens sometimes when he's sleeping, he's not aware of it. And he kind of just like sees that his pajamas are wet. And he said, oh God, I don't sleep in pajamas because he sometimes sleeps in his clothes for the next day. It was very personal and real and one-on-one with him to make this educational point clear. Did I say anything about shame, about how masturbation is forbidden? There's no reason to lay that on. I said that would just be something that then we want to figure out how to wash the sheets and make a system. At a later point, when we talk more about the connection between the sexuality and the erection and maybe a dream and the content of the dream and the unconscious and what's going on, then I think it would be appropriate to say that a male is discouraged from consciously engaging in masturbation. But that was too early for him, so it didn't go into my story. But I want to be clear that with an older child, then that absolutely is part of the conversation. I don't know if you know, but Shira is actually writing a doctoral dissertation on this topic of sexual education. So please talk about it with us, Shira. How'd you get into that? What are you finding?
Yeah, I got into it because I was a teacher before I went back to school for graduate school to be a psychologist. And one of the things that I taught was 12th grade halacha, which in the school that I was teaching at is it was a girls only school. And all of the topics are related to women and halacha. And one of the topics that we talked about was nida, another was yichud, another was kisei rosh, another was negia, which was sort of related to the nida talk. I actually took over teaching from Shoshana Samuels, so it's kind of a funny history here. And so I used it as a forum to talk about sexuality, and I viewed it as this is going to be a sexuality education course, also a halacha course, but I really viewed it as very intertwined. And when I was asked by the school to consult a little bit internally on their sexuality education curriculum, it became very clear that not everyone taught this way and not everyone was comfortable teaching this way. And the school had tried to implement a very high quality curriculum, but they couldn't because the teachers were so uncomfortable teaching it. And they needed to pull back a little bit and rethink how they could do it. And so I was very intrigued by this experience that I had when I was teaching. I also was a college teacher and had already become a yoetzet halacha. And so I was involved in sexuality education from that end. And I saw in Kala classes and in answering questions from women and from men, some of the ramifications of not having had quality sexuality education. And so my study relates to teachers and administrators' perspectives on sexuality education in modern Orthodox high schools. And God willing, there will be more for me to talk about in a few months, so stay tuned for more information. But often teenagers have this experience that something is going on inside of them, and children in general, not just teenagers. But if there's no conversation about it, it becomes very hard to integrate that. How does it align with my values? How does it align with halacha? How does it align with my peers' experiences? How do I understand this about myself? And so I know we're running out of time, but allowing for these conversations to take place, preempting some of their questions, because often they won't come to you until it's like a little too late and they've already been struggling with this for a little while, or already had questions that are on their minds. And so we want to be able to approach it in an open way. And also, I've seen that parents tend to get very nervous when children ask questions about this. So, for example, specifically Taharat HaMishpacha related. So, if a child sees their parents sleeping in the same bed and then they're not sleeping in the same bed, or sometimes their beds are together, or sometimes they're further apart, and they say, "Why are you doing that?" And the parent kind of freezes and is like, "How am I going to explain this mitzvah to them?" It could be a simple answer of Hashem says that sometimes we sleep in the same bed and sometimes we don't. And another helpful tool is asking them what they know about it, what they've noticed. Oh, did you notice that? When did you notice that? What questions do you have? What are your thoughts about it? And being able to meet them where they're at and answer their questions, just like where do babies come from? And parents get so nervous because they're like, there's so much for me to say and I don't know how to say it. But they might just be asking, literally, how does the baby get out of the body? Or where does the baby exist when it's inside the mother? And so asking them what information they know, what information they're seeking from you, allows you to better steer the conversation in the most helpful direction. So that's, applies to children and teenagers and adults. Is relevant across the span of when we're having these conversations.
So true and so important. I had a similar experience when my son asked for special sandwich cuddles that we have sometimes, where my husband and I both give him a big hug. And then once, when that was forbidden, he said, "Let me have a sandwich cuddle." And I said, "We can't do that now." "Why not?" And exactly like Shira said, there are times that Hashem says that couples can do sandwich hugs with their children, and sometimes that the couple can't touch, so then we can't do sandwich hug. Okay. I think he actually did some special thing of like, I'll give you a hug and then I'll give him a hug and it'll be like everyone hug. It was the sweetest thing in the world. As Shira just said, we're going to try in our open lines of communication to kind of answer what they're asking, because at different levels, at different ages, it's going to be a different question. And so the more we can clarify, the better. And we're going to also try to give the impression that this child can ask anything. I'm open to their questions. There's no question that's not smart enough, good enough, clear enough, appropriate enough. All questions are open. So I might compliment the questions. I might say later, wow, that was very thoughtful. Something that gives the impression you can ask anything. I'm going to let Shira wrap us up with this very critical concept.
So, like we've tried to give over throughout today's talk, we want to give the message to our children that we are there for them, that we are open to having these conversations, that even if we don't know the answer to something, we will do our best to answer, and we can always circle back to it. Like Shoshana mentioned in the very beginning, that we may have to revisit conversations and we may have to tell our children, you know what, I gave you an answer, but I think I want to add something to it, or I want to try to rephrase it in a way that I think might make it easier for you to understand. And that teaches them that there's no perfect way to have this conversation, and it's an ongoing conversation. We value it and we welcome the conversation. And teaching our children that there is nothing that's off the table, that they can come to us, that they can ask us their questions about anything that comes up, and also that we're willing to engage in the conversation first and we're not afraid to have that conversation, is such an integral message to them. And it will hopefully teach them that Taharat HaMishpacha is not something to be ashamed of, that we talk about it, and we talk about it appropriately and with discretion. But it's something that we value and that we appreciate, and it's such an integrated part of our lives. And we are so happy to give this mitzvah over to our children and teach them about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Shira. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Shoshana.
Thank you, Nishmat, and all the sponsors. Yashar koach to everybody. Thanks for learning with us.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.